police. So this is a serious issue. What the Federal Highway Police did, the director, a young guy, youngish, 40s, I think he was 47. He mobilized the Federal Highway Police troops, particularly in the Northeast, where Lula is very strong electorally, and blocked the roads of the people from the interior that were coming to the main towns to vote, on the day of the vote, just a few hours before closing time. So this was a deliberate effort to engage in vote suppression. And just to give you an idea how important this was, I know the area, I know the Northeast of Brazil. It's very poor, it's very black, and it's very left-wing, very radical. In the place where Lula got the most votes was in a place called Piauí, where Lula got 77% of the vote. In a place such as Bahia, which is, the key state in the Northeast, Lula got something like 76, 72, I think, 74. And in the other place, it was 71, 69, so huge. And they tried to stop that. They tried to stop these people from voting. So this was immediately stopped. And people were able to vote. So he was sacked, the director of the Federal Police, the Federal Highway Police. And some very terrible elements within the Federal Police, which is bigger and worse from the political point of view, were also involved in the shenanigans leading to the attacks on the buildings in Brasilia. They were also sacked. And now there is a process going on of purging, I would call it purging these right-wingers from everywhere. So the robustness of Lula has won the day, and now democracy is back in the country and is getting stronger and stronger by the day as Lula is taking all the measures. Bolsonaro now there's been a strong hint from the Supreme Court. Even the president of the Supreme Court, a guy called Girma, who suggested very publicly that Bolsonaro should be brought from the United States, where he escaped, to be indicted for participating in the coup, for organizing it. Lula recently, 2 days ago, accused Bolsonaro publicly of having organized the coup attempt. So now the Supreme Court is demanding that he comes back. What is interesting about this is Bolsonaro is a very strong ally of Donald Trump. And that means that Biden doesn't want him there. So Biden is quite prepared not to protect him. And it's clear that they're not. So Bolsonaro is a bit desperate. He went in the hospital with some funny illness so that he wasn't extradited. Then I'm aware that there is a campaign in Italy. Bolsonaro is an Italian surname in origin, so he must have some connections there. There is a campaign by the left, of some of my friends even, there are people I know personally, who organize a campaign saying, no, we're not going to allow, Bolsonaro to hide here in Italy. So he's looking for any place where to go. And his position has been weakened and weakened by the day. So the Bolsonarismo part of it is being dealt with very strongly by Lula and by his leadership, which is very radical now, much more, I would say, than on the first occasion when he was elected in 2002. Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. Lula was inaugurated on the 1st of January. On the 2nd of January, he signed an executive presidential decree by which he revoked all 6 major privatizations being carried out by Bolsonaro. Boom, in one go. So this is very secure. And he's moving very rapidly towards taking some other steps. his priorities, as he explained during the electoral campaign, and he's working on that now, is that there are, he said, as a result, as a consequence of neoliberal policies from the previous government than Bolsonaro, and from Bolsonaro's policies, which were worse, 33 million Brazilians that do not eat 3 times a day. And for him, this is absolutely a matter of honor. He wants everybody to be able to eat 3 times. When the Workers' Party, Lula's party, was in office from 2002 all the way to 2016, there were no people going hungry at all. Because it had a state program called Zero Hunger, that ensured, that throughout the nation there were enough resources and also other facilities so that nobody went hungry. And then he's also focusing on the proportion of people, the number of people who actually went into poverty, that joined the poverty or went beyond the poverty line or below the poverty line, which he reckoned at the time during the campaign, which was in 2022, to be 100 million. When he left, the population of Brazil is 210 million. So it's 50% of the population already in a very dire state. So this is what neoliberalism does, obviously, everywhere. Although the consequences, depending on how poor your country is, are worse or not worse, or not as worse or not as bad as in other places. So he's focusing on poverty eradication, ensuring that the population does not go hungry. And at the time when they were in charge, and they, in 5 years, took 40 million people out of poverty, with the policies of Lula and then Dilma Rousseff. So that gives you an idea. People were able to compare. What is interesting is this, and this is an important dimension because I follow what some various left-wing parties and individuals write, and some of them shoot from the hip, then they think, which is, very bad. Lula knew, and the Workers' Party knew, that in order to win the election against Bolsonaro, he needed the broadest possible electoral coalition, because Bolsonaro used every single instrument in the state, the police, the armed forces, the media, brutality, coercion, violence, everything for nearly 2 years to ensure that Lula and the Workers' Party could not win. So he knew that he had to have this very broad coalition. And he made alliances with some people who are not very left-wing, such as, for example, Gerardo Eichmann, who is the vice president, who is an entrepreneur, who is quite willing to support Lula in what Lula is doing, but who is not a left-winger. What is interesting as a consequence of this is that the political establishment, and the establishment in general in Brazil, they supported Bolsonaro against Lula. They supported the imprisonment of Lula. They supported the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff in 2016. But when they realized the consequences, the disastrous consequences of Bolsonaro's administration, they move away from him. And they try a few candidates to see whether they could put together, their own coalition and defeat Bolsonaro to replace him. They realized they couldn't get it. So they came to the conclusion the only candidate that could actually defeat Bolsonaro was Lula, so they all rallied behind him, which is a very peculiar situation. We never had this in Latin America. It's the first, certainly never in Brazil. So what you had was extremely right-wing magazines, such as Veja, who I read occasionally because it's disgusting. They were denouncing Bolsonaro as the main fascist threat against democracy in Brazil in the front cover. So that gives you an idea. I thought, wow, what's going on? I know Brazilian politics rather well. Then you have Folha de Sao Paulo, which is the equivalent of the Times or worse. And they were also defending Lula and attacking Bolsonaro. They were campaigning for Lula for the election. Then there was Rede Globo, which is the equivalent of, is the biggest television channel network imaginable in the world. It's huge, and it's extremely powerful, very, very powerful. They've been making and undoing presidencies, since 1960 something. So they also came round and supported Lula against Bolsonaro in the election. And the Supreme Court, that was also participating in the whole business against the Workers' Party before, also supported Lula and was against Bolsonaro. The National Electoral Council, literally everything except the armed forces, where there were these issues that I mentioned. So for the first time, the whole establishment is behind Lula. So Lula has to actually deliver, and what he's done, he's made a promise, something he didn't do before, added something to the program of the Workers' Party, which is to defend the environment. The Amazon is extremely important for the world, not only for Brazil. And Bolsonaro was deliberately deforesting the place. He allowed armed thugs to go around indigenous lands, killing them, brutalizing them, intimidating them, so that landowners could take over their land, because it's a huge area. And the level of deforestation that was taking place under Bolsonaro was gigantic, very dangerous indeed. So what Lula has done, he has appointed Sonia Guajajara, who is an indigenous woman, an indigenous activist. And he's quite an impressive character. She is in charge of defending the Amazon. She has appointed another indigenous activist woman to be in charge of defending the indigenous populations. And Lula has committed himself to defend the Amazon. And he has made proposals to all other countries in the region that actually have or have part of their territories are in the Amazon, to set up some sort of coalition, some sort of cartel to defend the Amazon together collectively. These involve certainly Colombia. Venezuela is quite willing to go for it. Ecuador is going to be persuaded, even though not yet. Peru could be part of it, and so on. So this is an extremely important one. And what they want to do with this is to take it to international bodies, in the United Nations and so on, to get actual resources to defend the Amazon, which is extremely good. And already there is a process which is quite vigorous by military forces, under the command of Lula and the government, to expel illegal mining from the Amazon. And this is being forcibly done. I've seen some videos and so on, and you could tell, the Brazilian army and the Brazilian police are rough. So if you don't obey quickly, they make sure that you do, if you see what I mean. So this is really, really good. And now he's got to ensure that he's got enough in terms of proposals for the economy to make sure that, number one, the economy grows, and number two, that he's got, the economy, the country has enough resources for his social program. There is nothing that is going to come from the United States, even though Lula went to the United States recently. But I think that's part and parcel of, the tactical move, which is essential. Brazil is very important. I think Lula possibly went to talk to Biden to tell him the parameters of how far, how much Brazil was prepared to collaborate when it came to Latin America. And as part of that, he made one proposal, which he made public later on, made a proposal to Biden that Brazil wants to set up some sort of international coalition that Brazil is going to lead to mediate, to bring about peace in the Ukraine. That's sort of quite. And at the same time he did this, he strengthened links with Russia, with Putin and so on, and with China as well. So that gives you an idea that this is extremely important, not only for the Amazon, not only for Brazil, but also for the world. When it comes to Latin America, and I'll finish on Brazil with this point, because it's much more, but such a big country. With Brazil, the institutions of the first left-wing wave, that took place up to 2016, 18, 19, the institutions that were established there, such as the Commonwealth of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, that was set up by Hugo Chavez and others, that not only organizes and coordinates all the Latin American nations, but it specifically excludes the United States and Canada. They cannot be part of it. They are out, which is perfect. Has been reinvigorated, and it had its 7th summit now on the 29th of January this year. And of course, Lula and Brazil play a central role. Having Brazil as part of it gives such a weight to CELAC that is incredible. Without Brazil, say if Bolsonaro had been part of it, had been the president, then CELAC would be still holding his summit, but without the same weight and the same significance. And interestingly, at these summits, the non-Latin American head of state that was invited to address the summit was Xi Jinping, the Prime Minister, President of China, who said, the relationship with China and Latin America is absolutely crucial for China, but also for Latin America. What I mean by this is, apart from the diplomatic niceties, is that Latin America, with Brazil as part of the new left-wing wave, we don't have to depend on the United States for anything, or for very little. We can get credit, investment, we can get markets, and we can get, just about markets, credit, investment, and technology from China without needing to worry about the United States. So the United States can deny anything it wants to us, and that's not a problem. One of the most important steps that he's taken in terms of transforming the world, apart from the ones I mentioned, is the visit that he paid to Alberto Fernandez, the president of Argentina. And they publicly committed themselves to set up a single joint currency. And they're asking others in Latin America to join. Maduro from Venezuela said he's quite willing and ready to join right away. Diaz-Canel in Cuba obviously is keen as well, and there will be a few others. To establish a new currency, a single currency, is not easy. Nevertheless, this is not going to be like the euro. That's not the model. The cryptocurrency is going to be a cryptocurrency to start with, and it's going to be called Sur, which means south. That is to say, us, in the south. And Sur is going to play a different role. It's going to have a mechanism by which, whenever two countries that have different economies, some of them stronger, some of them more productive, some of them less productive, some of them weaker, whenever they exchange, somebody will lose, somebody will win. So the idea of this currency, that there is a compensation mechanism so that nobody loses. And these Sur will prepare the ground for a proposal that Hugo Chavez made in 2006, 2007 and 8, to set up a Bank of the South, which was a joint bank of all the South American nations that will substitute the IMF and the World Bank, so that to make them redundant. And Lula, during the electoral campaign, said that he made a mistake by not having taken Hugo's, as he called it, Hugo Chavez's proposal for a single currency and for a bank. Now this is beginning to move forward, which is brilliant, it's fantastic. And given that in the rest of the world, there are several economies that are, I would call it, de-dollarizing, then clearly this is a part of this is the same sort of trend. And therefore there will be willing partners in many places, certainly China and others, that will be willing to participate in any exchange, trade exchange, by us in Latin America using this currency. So Brazil has transformed the region quite dramatically. And now what we have is a second left-wing wave, which is, on the one hand, more complex than the first one. It's got more problems because, you know, the world is in a mess, there's crisis, there's war, and we're coming out from many of the economies in Latin America, including Brazil, are coming out from, you know, several years of terrible neoliberalism, which needs to be repaired and recovered, and this is not easy. Nevertheless, we have left-wing presidents in Brazil, in Mexico, Argentina, in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Nicaragua, and then particularly now we have in Colombia. You know, this is transformed completely. Some people say even the president of Chile is part of this current. In a sort of way, he is. We also had Pedro Castillo, who in Peru was part of the left wing, but he was overthrown. So we have the biggest economies with a very strong will to actually come together, coordinate, regionally integrate, and combine everything they have. Just to give you an idea, Brazil is an industrial giant. Brazil is the 10th largest industrial country in the world. It's not. Brazil produces warplanes, just to give you an idea how far. Produces vehicles, you know. Venezuela is a world energy giant. It's got problems and it's recovering and so on, but the deposits of oil are there. Bolivia, which is another left-wing government, has got all the gas deposits that you may want. Now, with the crisis in Europe, with Ukraine and the gas and so on, in Latin America, we have all the gas we want at very low prices, with a friendly government that's willing to collaborate with everybody else. Argentina is an agricultural world power. Mexico has got huge experience, particularly in dealing with the United States, but it's also a very developed economy. Cuba is a world biomedical power. You know, it's produced 6 vaccines. It's produced all sorts of medicines, vaccines against meningitis and hepatitis, these kind of things. And it's got doctors everywhere. So imagine if you put all of this together in a sort of coherent, harmonious program of economic development for the whole region, which is where things are moving, with our own currency, without having to, you know, with the ability to defend ourselves against any possible aggression. It looks very positive. And before I move on to Peru, there were elections in one of the worst places from the right-wing point of view, was, apart from Bolsonaro in Brazil, was Lasso in Ecuador. On the 5th of February this year now, a few days ago, there have been elections, local elections, and what they call a national consultation, which is sort of referendum. Lasso organized a tricky referendum. He would ask questions such as this: would you support? Because the idea of him was to get, you know, percentages in his favor in the consultation, in the referendum. They had 8 questions, 8. And just to give you that, one of them was something like this: would you support the narco traffickers who are destroying the nation, who are, you know, contaminating our children and engaging crime and killing people, or would you support the government that fights them, combats them? Who is going to vote? So that's sort of 2 questions, but people knew the 8 questions, he lost them all, absolutely all of them, he lost. I don't think he lost because people support the narco traffickers. It's because people voted against him. But more important than that, the party of Rafael Correa, the Citizen Revolution Movement, which is called now, won massively. You know, Lasso, in terms of the number of mayorships in the country, which is 23 of them, 23 major mayorships, the Citizen Revolution won 9, the indigenous movement won 6, and then the few other smaller currents won the rest of it. Lasso got 3. So that gives you an idea of how bad it was. And I was talking to an Ecuadorian comrade of mine recently, a few days ago. I said, how did it go? How much do you do? What do you get? He said, Francisco, I cannot believe it myself. We've got more councillors in the country that at the height of Rafael Correa's government. More. So even they were able to win Guayaquil, which is a right-wing city. It's like winning in Chelsea, if you see what I mean, or worse. So that was fantastic. So this is, Lasso's days a number politically, and now it looks very positive given this Latin American context that the left, possibly the Correa as well, is going to come back in Ecuador very soon. I don't know how soon, but soonish. So that is in place. And we had the problem in Peru. In Peru, Castillo won the presidency, Pedro Castillo.
Can I just butt in a moment, Francisco? We're running out of time. Okay. I would propose that you start on Peru if you've as long as you've got enough time to come back in again. That you start in the next 40-minute session. Is that okay? No because problem. We've got about under a minute and a half now. So if we all leave the meeting and then come back in again.
In the same link.
Use the same link, that's right. So we can end the meeting, come straight back in again with the same link. And this time I will make sure that I record from the beginning because I missed the first few minutes. I'm really, really apologise for that to you and to everyone else. Okay, I'm going to switch off the record, pause the recording.